Oh,
What are you doing?
I'm putting my hands up.
You are making us look bad.
No, I am not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Why would you do that?
Because it is a very sensible thing to do.
Venom was a character who's had a film trying to get off the ground for over 20 years by the time that the 2018 movie released. In 1997, there was a script by David S. Goyer. New Line Cinema was set to produce, and Dolph Lundgren was in talks to star. And the antagonist would have been Carnage. This project never got off the ground, and as I'm sure most of you know, Sony Pictures acquired the film rights to the Spider-Man characters from the Spider-Man comics, Venom included. Eddie Brock and Venom eventually got shoehorned into Spider-Man 3 after director of all three Spider-Man films, Sam Raimi, was pretty adamant that Venom wouldn't be in his films. Producer Avi Arad felt Raimi relied too much on his personal favorite Spider-Man villains and not villains that modern fans wanted to see. Arad got his way, and Topher Grace played Eddie Brock and Venom in the film. Grace's performance was not well received by fans at the time, and the character also suffered due to lack of development as the movie had three villains. Arad, meanwhile, revealed plans for a Venom spin-off without Topher Grace, as he felt that he couldn't carry a film. Sony was actively developing a Venom film alongside direct sequels to Spider-Man 3 by July of 2008. In hopes of adding longevity to the Spider-Man franchise, not that dissimilar from what Fox was doing with its X-Men franchise by having X-Men films and Wolverine films. Jacob Estes had written a script for Venom, but Sony was contemplating taking it in a different direction from Estes' draft and sought out new writers. Paul Wernick and Wet Reese were hired in September of 2008 by Sony to write a new script. And during this time, insiders were suggesting that Sony have Grace return to the role because the likable actor could be a sympathetic evildoer. Wernick and Reese had pitched an original idea for the film to Sony, which Reese said was realistic, grounded, and a little more darker take on the character. The pair worked on an outline with Sony and Marvel, with Marvel having specific rules about the villain and the backstory. The draft was completed by April 2009 and included a role written specifically for Stan Lee. There was a sequence in which the symbiote goes from body to body through a city and making whoever it inhabits become violent. And when they would strike somebody else, the symbiote would jump to that person. Wernick and Reese turned in a second draft in September of 2009, with Reese stating that Sony was pushing forward in whatever ways they push forward. A month later, Gary Ross, who was in the process of rewriting Spider-Man 4, was hired to rewrite the Venom script, as well as direct and produce along with Arad. Topher Grace was considered to not likely return for the role, as the film was starting from scratch and was looking to make Venom an anti-hero who became a defendant of the helpless. In January of 2010, Sony announced that the Spider-Man franchise would be rebooted after Raimi decided he no longer wanted to pursue a sequel to Spider-Man 3. In March of 2012, Sony was still interested in making a Venom film, and were planning to capitalize on the release of their first reboot film, The Amazing Spider-Man. Josh Trank was in talks to direct after Ross left the project to direct The Hunger Games. There was talk of the Venom film connecting to The Amazing Spider-Man because everybody wanted to make their own Marvel Cinematic Universe, but Arad called it an Eddie Brock story, but fellow producer Matt Tolmach added, "Hopefully all these worlds will live together in peace someday." In December of 2013, Sony announced that they plan to use The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to establish their own expanded universe based on the Marvel properties that they had the rights to. Arad and Tolmach would produce the films as part of a brain trust, and Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Ed Solomon were set to write the Venom screenplay, with Kurtzman set to direct. In April of 2014, it was announced that Venom would release after The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which was scheduled for May 27th of 2016, but it would also come out before The Amazing Spider-Man 4. But The Amazing Spider-Man 2 flopped, and Sony was under pressure to perform, and they had to take a hard look at their most important franchise, which resulted in a change of course for their shared universe. The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was pushed back to 2018, and the Venom film, retitled to Venom Carnage, was moved up to 2017. Kurtzman was still attached to direct and right alongside Solomon, but in February of 2015, Sony and Marvel Studios announced a partnership that would have Marvel produce the next Spider-Man film for Sony and integrate the character into their MCU. Sony, meanwhile, still planned to produce spin-off films without Marvel's involvement, but these spin-offs were believed to have been cancelled so Sony could focus on Spider-Man Homecoming with Marvel. Venom again got revived by Sony in March of 2016 with Arad and Tolmach, once again producing, and Dante Harper writing a new script. The project was to be a standalone film, and there was hopes it would launch its own franchise, unrelated to Sony and Marvel's Spider-Man films. In 2017, Sony gave Venom a release date of October 5th, 2018, and announced Kurtzman was not involved in the new project. A new director had not been signed on yet, but Scott Rosenberg and Jeff Pinker were writing a script. Venom was to start a new franchise and a new shared universe separate from the MCU. It was also planned to have an R rating on a smaller budget, largely inspired by Fox's success with Deadpool and Logan. Sony had a short list of directors, with Adi Shankar believed to be on the list, along with Adam Wingard. In May, it was announced that Tom Hardy would star as Eddie Brock, and Ruben Fleischer had been signed on to direct. This film would be the official beginning of Sony's Marvel Universe, but the film was not considered a spin-off of any other film. Fleischer was chosen by Sony after a long search, and Hardy, who was cast quickly after he left J.C. Chandor's Triple Frontier, was a fan of the character, which led to Sony wanting to cast him, as Hardy knew the character, and they figured they could bank on an in-demand actor. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige confirmed that Venom would be a standalone Sony project and that Marvel had no plans to connect it with the MCU in any way. Amy Pascal, however, stated that Sony's Marvel films would take place in the same world as the new MCU films, the first being Spider-Man Homecoming. She said Venom would connect to the next planned film in their Marvel universe, Silver and Black, which was a Silver Sable and Black Cat film, and that there was a potential for Tom Holland's Spider-Man to show up in either film. Sony wasn't interested in making what they perceived to be conventional comic book movies, wanting to give their films each a distinctive style, so Venom was considered to be a spin on horror films, but with more fun. Fleischer wanted to explore Venom's origins and the Jekyll and Hyde element between Brock and the symbiote. With Hardy already being cast, Riz Ahmed entered talks to join the production in August of 2017, with Matt Smith, Pedro Pascal, and Matthias Schoenaerts also having been considered for the Carlton Drake role. In September, Michelle Williams was in negotiations to play Anne Wayne, and by October, Jenny Slate, Reed Scott, and Scott Hayes had all entered into talks. While this was going on, Kelly Marcel was writing the last draft of the script, and Tom Hardy was recording his lines for the symbiote, after which they were modulated and some other effects were thrown in to make the Venom voice a little bit more threatening and cool sounding. Hardy would wear an earpiece on the set, and the lines would play through that so that Hardy could react to the symbiote talking to him. Venom drew material from the Venom Lethal Protector miniseries and the Planet of the Symbiote story. The Lethal Protector story was chosen as Fleischer liked that it was the first solo Venom series and it freed him from Spider-Man. Spider-Man not being able to be included in the film gave the writers a challenge of writing a character that was defined by Spider-Man but not having Spider-Man present. They used the Ultimate Marvel Venom as an inspiration due to that version of the Venom not being tied to Spider-Man. Fleischer had also stated that Venom would be a film with no heroes and that they were planning a huge world with many characters. It was also revealed that Riot, another symbiote, would be in the film. The filmmakers were also presented with the challenge of making Venom stand out during night scenes, as they wouldn't have the white spider symbol that adorns his chest because Venom's origin wouldn't be tied to Spider-Man. The decision was made to give Venom white veins and make a pattern out of them. Fleischer wanted this film to stand out tonally from the MCU and the DCEU films, and he wanted it to honor the violence of Venom from the comics, but Sony execs were reluctant to push this element far enough for an R rating. They feared that putting out an R-rated film would hurt the chances of the film being absorbed into the MCU or the character being used in crossover films. Principal photography began October 23, 2017, with filming locations in Atlanta and New York City. Iron Man cinematographer Matthew Libatique lensed the film, which surprises me because I've seen a lot of films that Libatique has lensed, and I kind of felt that this film strongly resembled the cinematography of a Bayformers movie. Production designer Oliver Scholl worked on this film after he finished his work on Spider-Man Homecoming. Hardy was allowed to improvise on set and to take the scenes where he felt they needed to go. One noticeable example of this was,
Is anyone else hot?
Sir?
No.
Please. Wait, come on. Eddie, this is unacceptable. I'm gonna call the police. What are you doing? No, please don't. No. Eddie, please.
Some additional shooting was done in San Francisco for 10 days in January of 2018, with Hardy wrapping his part up on January 27th, only for Hardy to oversee reshoots of the film in June of 2018 in Los Angeles. Venom was one of the first films to take advantage of Sony's new post-production facilities in Culver City, California, at Sony's Pictures Stage 6, which housed 2 new theaters equipped for sound design and Dolby Atmos technology. 2 new stages for sound mixing with Avid Technologies Pro Tools workstations, and a theater setup for remote visual effects and color grading review. Fleischer's focus while editing the film was to cultivate the relationship between Brock and Venom, as he felt that that was the core of the film. The opening of the film was iterated on several times, though Fleischer always wanted it to start with a bang, which ultimately led to the spaceship crash. Along with Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock and Venom in the film, it also stars Michelle Williams as Anne Wayne, Riz Ahmed as Carlton Drake, Riot, Scott Hayes as Treese, Reed Scott as Dan, and Jenny Slate as Dora Skirth, with Melora Walters, Woody Harrelson, and Michelle Lee. Warning, normally in these videos I go over movies that are not really old, but fairly old, that most people probably already know the plots of. There will be spoilers coming up, so yeah, if you don't want this movie spoiled for you, probably should stop now. The film opens with a probe crashing to Earth, the probe belonging to Bioengineering Corporation, the Life Foundation. The probe had discovered a comet covered in symbiotic life forms and was bringing 4 samples back to Earth, but one escaped and caused the ship to crash in Malaysia. The Life Foundation recovered 3 of the samples, but the 4th that escaped and caused the crash was not recovered. Eddie Brock is a journalist who, through reading his fiancée Anne's emails, learns that Carlton Drake's Life Foundation is being sued by the families of people who have died during the Life Foundation's human trials. Brock is set to interview Drake about the safety of the Life Foundation's rocket program, and during the interview he begins asking about the human trials and the lawsuits.
What about the legal cases?
Sorry?
Yeah, the actual legal cases, like Sarah Chambers, Phil Barkley, Bob McDonald.
Thank you so much for
And
coming.
they're just some of the people who walked.
Have a nice day.
They never got to
We're done.
work out.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Could you show now, please?
The Dead Foundation. Don't touch the Dead Foundation thing. We're not finished.
Yes, you are, Mr. Brock.
Is that a threat?
This results in Eddie being escorted out and his firing from his job. Anne also gets fired from the law firm that she works at, which results in her breaking off their engagement. Drake, meanwhile, begins to study the 3 symbiotes in his possession. 6 months later, Eddie has become a bit of a loser. Drake is getting closer to full symbiosis. Dora Skirth, an employee of Drake's, is bothered by the people dying during the human trials with the symbiotes. And approaches Brock. She leads Brock into the Life Foundation's research facility to search for evidence, and while being left alone, Brock happens upon a homeless woman who he had befriended earlier in the film. She's being held in a high-tech cell and pleads with Brock to break her out. When he manages to get her out, she attacks him and the symbiote inside of her transfers to Brock. He escapes, able to do things that he was never able to do before, and after escaping from the security by hiding in a tree, he returns to his apartment. He displays strange symptoms and is really hungry. So we get a Ore-Ida Tater Tots commercial. Before he eats some trash can chicken and vomits.
Yeah.
At which point Venom decides to speak to him in a brief but hilarious scene. Eventually, Brock finds Anne and her new boyfriend Dan, who happens to be a doctor at a restaurant, interrupting their fancy meal. During the chaos, as Brock tries to explain to her what's been going on, and he starts acting strange and eventually takes a dip in the lobster tank. Dan eventually takes Brock back to the hospital that he works at and tries to run an MRI on him, but Brock freaks out in a spectacular fashion and leaves. Upon returning to his apartment, a team of mercenaries is sent to recover the symbiote after Drake learns that it was Skirth who orchestrated the break-in and that Eddie is in possession of the missing symbiote. Drake unleashes a symbiote on Skirth for her transgressions. Meanwhile, at Eddie's apartment,
I will take care of this myself.
Eddie, where's the bug? Take him down.
I'm so sorry about your friends.
the symbiote helps Eddie fight off the mercenaries that break in, and Brock escapes, and we get a pretty decent car chase where the mercenaries are using exploding drones to try and kill Brock, but Venom pulls off some tricks to save his ass, and eventually, though, Brock does get sideswiped by Treese, and as Treese does some evil villain posturing above a broken Eddie, the Venom symbiote manifests itself around his body, and it's fucking awesome.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
During this reveal of our full-blown Venom in the film, the line that he says is actually ripped straight from The Amazing Spider-Man 374. Treese escapes, but Venom eats the head of a cop or another security member of Treese's team. It's not real clear, but the cops do show up. Anyways, Venom escapes and tells Brock about the symbiotes and that they plan to invade Earth. He offers a deal to Brock and tells him he'll spare him if Brock helps them achieve their goal. Back at the Life Foundation, Skirth and the last remaining symbiote at the facility have both died due to incompatibility, so Drake orders Treese to recover Brock alive. Brock tries to go to his old workplace to give evidence of Drake's crimes to his former boss, but the desk clerk won't let him in. Venom tells Brock if he wants to go up, just say so. They climb the skyscraper and Venom comments on how the city looks from above before a passenger jet flies over, and the sound puts Venom into great pain. Brock falls, but Venom saves them at the last minute and breaks them into Brock's former boss's office. Brock leaves the evidence and Venom tells him to just jump out the window.
Jump. Pussy.
As he's leaving, he's confronted by a SWAT team.
Guys, you do not want to do this, trust me.
Copy!
All right, have it your own way.
Mask!
Copy.
What the hell is that thing? He's not going down! Hold the fire!
Venom manifests again, and they fight off the SWAT team in probably one of the best action sequences of the film. As Venom goes to eat the last SWAT member, Anne happens upon the scene, and Eddie reveals himself to her. She tells him to get in the car, and she's taking him to the hospital. Venom says to go with her because he likes her. During the trip, Venom tells Brock he should apologize to Anne for getting her fired because he hasn't yet, and he might not get the chance to later. While at the hospital, Dan reveals to Brock that the symbiote is atrophying his internal organs, and Venom is telling Brock that he can fix the damage, but Anne uses the MRI machine to weaken the symbiote, and it separates from Brock. Brock is taken by Treese on his way out of the hospital, though. Riot, who has been making his way to San Francisco, finally arrives at the Life Foundation and bonds with Drake, who agrees to help Riot bring more symbiotes to Earth. He interrogates Brock and reveals to him that he has a symbiote bonded to him.
This is the last time I'm asking you. Where is my symbiote?
I have no idea.
Oh, God! Where's Venom?
That is the ugliest looking thing I have ever seen.
Brock informs him he doesn't know where Venom is. Drake leaves Brock to Treese and his men, and they proceed to take Brock into the woods to execute him, only to be saved by Anne, who has the Venom symbiote with her.
Calm as a bitch. I don't believe in karma.
Hi, Eddie.
After she dispatches Treese and his men, she proceeds to make out with Brock. Venom and Brock opt to try and stop Drake, as Venom has decided that he likes Earth and doesn't want the symbiotes to invade and destroy it. They confront Drake and Riot, and a big CGI fight breaks out. During the fight, Anne disrupts the symbiotes with microphone feedback playing through the PA system. Eventually, Brock seems to have the upper hand when he and Drake are separated from their symbiotes. However, Drake rebonds with Riot and mortally wounds Brock before boarding the rocket. Venom rebonds with Brock, though, and saves his life before climbing the rocket and taking it out with the very weapon that Riot used on Brock. As Venom falls and the rocket explodes, it appears Venom is destroyed by the fire and the explosion, with Brock surviving. Sometime later, Ann and Brock are talking outside of Ann's apartment, with Ann believing that Venom is gone. However, we learn otherwise.
Hey, Eddie. We're not going to tell Dan about this, okay?
Look at her. She has no idea we are going to get her back.
The two part ways, and Brock and Venom discuss what they are going to do.
So, what culinary delights will tickle the pickle tonight?
Potato tarts and chocolate.
Right, okay, no problem.
Witnessing a shakedown, at which point Venom confronts the man shaking down the store owner.
What the hell are you?
We are Venom.
There is a mid-credit scene with Brock going to interview Cletus Cassidy, who tells Brock that when he gets out, there will be carnage. And that was Venom. I'm going to level with you. It's not a perfect film, but goddamn is it fun. Tonally, the film is a little scattered. It takes itself very seriously during the opening 45 minutes or so, and then you get scenes like the restaurant scene, which is just over-the-top fucking batshit crazy. The film flirts with horror. I mean, we see Venom bite people's heads off. Even Ann, while bonded with the Venom symbiote, bites a dude's head off. But it's very cleanly done. You see it. At one point, you see a headless body. But there's no gore, no blood, nothing. Sony couldn't commit to going the whole 9 yards because they were scared of compromising any crossover potential. There's some truly great horror-inspired sequences in the movie. The SWAT team sequence. And saving Brock from trees in the woods, but these are really the only two scenes that have the look and feel to them. It's a shame that we didn't get a bit more of that. The action sequences are pretty good. The chase through the streets of San Francisco was entertaining and gave us a bit of Venom without giving us full Venom. For some of the humor, it did kind of fall flat in some places, but in other places it was okay.
Don't give up on her. Either of you.
We won't.
Who's that guy?
Okay.
Wait, this thing looks delicious.
For some, the humor fell flat, and for others, it was okay. I fall into the second camp. I didn't mind the humor, and even laughed at a few of the jokes. It has been reported that 40 minutes was cut from this film, and it really does feel like it. I feel like there was supposed to be more between Brock and Venom after the chase through San Francisco, and before he breaks into the office of his old boss. And I also feel like that there might have been more between Ann and Venom after the hospital scene. I would like to see a version of this film with those 40 minutes edited back into it, but Tom Hardy has said that everything they wanted in the film for the narrative is in there. But I still can't shake the feeling that there's something missing. And I know I'm probably going to get some shit for this, but I was fine with the look of Venom. I thought the design was as faithful as they could be to the character without having the white spider logo, and honestly, it doesn't bother me that it's not there. In fact, I feel that it could have come across as really cheesy if it was there. Some YouTube critics have said that they didn't like the look because Venom looked too rubbery or slick. The symbiote itself resembles a kind of a viscous liquid. It makes sense that when it manifests on its host, that Venom and Riot would look kind of shiny and slick, that they have a sheen to them. Plus, Venom is black, so if he was matte black, then these same people would be bitching that he doesn't stand out enough during the nighttime and low-light sequences. Venom in the comic books and the Spider-Man animated series in the early 90s always kind of had a shine to them, or reflected light in a way that gave you the impression that he was kind of shiny or slick, like black oil or something along those lines. He's not a dude in spandex. Eddie Brock is covered by a liquid-like alien, and it looks that way in the film as far as I'm concerned. The film, compared to modern blockbusters, had a small budget and somehow still managed to have pretty good CGI for the most part. The ending fight was kind of a mess, but the idea that they were going with and what they were trying to achieve was admirable. I liked how Brock and Drake were kind of being ripped out of the symbiotes and falling out of their symbiotes during the fight. And, I mean, honestly, at least it wasn't a beam in the fucking sky type ending. I know that people were disappointed by Spider-Man not being in the film, but again, this didn't really bother me. I've read the origin in the comics. I've seen it in the animated series when I was a kid. I saw it in Spider-Man 3. So it was refreshing in a way that they tried to do it differently. I don't need another version of Brock's life going to shit, him blaming Spider-Man, coming across Spider-Man's discarded symbiote, and them using their mutual hatred of Spider-Man to drive their plot forward. Also, by doing what they did with this movie, they freed Venom from the confines of being defined by Spider-Man and bringing a different spin on the character. The real highlight for me, though, with this movie was Tom Hardy. He fucking nailed it in this movie, and starting Brock off as decently successful and confident, and then having his life fall apart because he couldn't keep his fucking mouth shut, we get a less confident Brock. When the symbiote finally comes into the picture, and the back and forth between Brock and Venom it's fucking spot on. And I really can't think of anybody that could do it better than Tom Hardy did. Brock has no idea what's going on and is thrown into a set of circumstances that he doesn't really understand. He's nervous and apprehensive at first, but then grows confident again. The work they did on Hardy's voice for the Venom symbiote works extremely well for me too. And while I don't know exactly what I imagine Venom sounding like, I now can't imagine him sounding any different than how he does in this film. I know there was disappointment about the film not being rated R, and while I don't think an R rating would have necessarily made for a better movie overall, I think they should have just gone all in with this movie. For the 2 or 3 small moments where Venom is shown eating people, they could have just thrown some blood in there, and for the hell of it, I mean. And even when Riot wipes out a whole room full of people, it doesn't really have weight to it, and his victims just kind of fall to the ground unscathed. Like I said, the movie isn't perfect. It has some problems with tone and wigs, apparently, because Woody Harrelson and Michelle Williams have some god-awful fucking wigs in this movie. The mid-credit sequence with Cletus Cassidy was it was very sequel-baity. Not having Woody Harrelson in any of the trailers or promotional material, but saying that he was in the movie, basically made people know that he was going to be Cletus Cassidy, and he was probably going to show up at like an end credit sequence. So they should have just kept Woody Harrelson's role in the movie quiet. They shouldn't even have mentioned that he was in it. As far as the movie itself goes, I had fun with it. And while it's not Infinity War level quality for comic book films, I would say that this film was more entertaining than the Amazing Spider-Man movies, Thor the Dark World, and Iron Man 2 at least. It's a decent enough film that is carried by a strong performance from Tom Hardy that more than makes up for the shortcomings that are present. And of course, like any movie, your mileage may vary, but if you haven't seen it yet, I would say give it a go. Just at least for the Eddie Brock Venom bromance.
Outstanding. Now, let's bite all the heads off and pile them up in the corner.
Why would we do that?
Pile of bodies. Pile of heads.